Hey, MathKook here. This video contains one of many examples in my Algebra 2 library. The rest of those examples, along with hundreds of other videos, are only available at mathkook.com. Let's MathKook it up. This question says, find the inverse function of f of x equals x minus 1 squared, where x is greater than or equal to 1. Then find the domain and range of f and f inverse of x. Lastly, graph both f and f inverse on an xy coordinate plane. Alright, so let's start with the first part. Find the inverse function of f of x equals x minus 1 squared, where x is greater than or equal to 1. So how do we find the inverse function? Here are the steps. Step number 1, write y instead of f of x. So let's start off by doing that. So here's our function. So we're simply just going to write y in place of f of x. So that's pretty easy. Alright, step number 2, switch x and y. So wherever you see a y, write x, and vice versa. Alright, so we see a y, so we write x, and then we see an x, we write y. Alright, next, solve for y, step 3. So here's y, we need to get rid of this square. How do we get rid of a square? Well, we're going to square root both sides. Now this is a little tricky, because whenever you square root both sides, you have to put a plus or minus in front of the other side. Now, in this case, we can't do plus or minus because it wouldn't be a function at that point. So what do we have to do? Well, they've limited the domain at the beginning. Now, why did they limit the domain of this parabola? And we know it's a parabola because it's x squared. They limited the domain, so I'll kind of just write on the side here, because if you have a parabola, this would not pass the horizontal line test. In other words, it would not have an inverse function. So what they did is they said x is greater than or equal to 1, which is 1 is right here. So what they did is they crossed out. They got rid of the left part of the parabola so that it would pass the horizontal line test, so it would have an inverse. So essentially what they did is they got rid of this part and kept the right part of the graph. Okay, so let's keep that in mind here. So because they kept the right part of the graph, when we get to this point, we're going to pick the positive side. So that's really important. So normally it'd be plus or minus. So I'll go ahead and write it even. So plus or minus root x equals, and on the right side, the square root and the square cancel out, so you get y minus 1. Now, we have to choose one of these two, the plus or the minus. We're going to choose the positive one because we kept the right side of the graph. If they said x is less than or equal to 1, then we would have kept the left side of the graph, which means we would have kept the lower part, or like the minus sign here. Alright, so now that we've knocked that out, we'll get rid of the negative. So I'm going to rewrite this as just root x, the positive one, right? Y minus 1. Alright, so we add 1 to both sides, and we get y equals root x plus 1. Okay, so now we have our inverse function, and the last step is instead of y, we're going to replace y with f inverse of x. It's really basically the same thing. It's just kind of identifying what it actually is. So f inverse of x here equals the square root of x plus 1. All right. So there's our inverse function. Let's go ahead and box that guy. All right, next we are going to find the domain and range of both f and f inverse. So I'm going to get rid of this chart here, and I'm going to bring down our chart for domain and range. Okay, also going to erase this here. Okay, so if we look at our f of x, they've limited our, here's f of x, they've limited the domain to x is greater than or equal to 1. So this is our domain. They actually give it to us. So in interval notation, that means from 1 to infinity. So that is our domain of f of x. All right, so that's also, remember, if that's the domain of f of x, that's also the range of f inverse, because the domain of f is always the range of f inverse. So this is 1 to infinity as well, and we'll see that when we actually graph it. All right, next we need to find the range of f of x or the domain of f inverse. Remember, these two guys are going to be the same as well. So we could do it two ways. We could look at f inverse and find the domain here, or we can graph f of x here and then find the range of it on the graph, and then that will be here and here. But for this one, I'm just going to look at the domain of f inverse. because we don't have the graph quite yet. So the domain here, we have a square root. So because there's a x underneath here, there's going to be a restriction on the x. So x has to be greater than or equal to 0, right? Because we can't take the square root of a negative number. So this is it. This is our domain of our inverse function. So in interval notation, this will be 0 to infinity. And it includes the 0, so that's why we have a bracket. And also, if that's the domain of f inverse, it's also the range of f of x. So there it is there. All right, so now we have our domain and ranges of each function. Let's go ahead and graph on an xy coordinate. Notice I've already included the line or dashed line y equals x. Now, that's a really important line for inverse functions because f of x and f inverse are going to be symmetric about this line. So we expect both graphs to be a mirror image across this line. So let's see if that happens. So we're going to graph our parabola first. Now, let's make a little chart here, plugging in some points. Notice we have to start at 1 and go right. So I'm going to make a little chart here. I'm going to plug in 1, 2, and 3. All right, so if I plug in 1, it'll be 1 minus 1, which is 0, squared, which is 0. Then we'll plug in 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, squared is still 1. Then we'll plug in 3. 3 minus 1 is 2, squared, which gives us 4. All right, so let's go ahead and graph these points on our graph here. I'm going to graph this one in blue. So 1, 0, which means we just go right 1, up 0. So that's right there. So that's our starting point for the parabola because they say x is greater than or equal to 1. So that's going to be the very first point on this parabola. And then we'll do 2, 1. So right 2, up 1. So just right there. Next is 3, 4. So we go right 3, up 4, which is like right there. All right, and then we draw our half parabola. So there is our graph of f of x. So I'll go ahead and label that. So that's f of x. Next, we'll graph f inverse of x. So here's the function for f inverse. So I'm going to bring up a chart here. So what's the first number we should plug in? Well, probably the first number that's defined in its domain, which is 0. So if we'll plug in 0, then I like to plug in perfect squares if possible. So 1 would be another good one, and then 4. That way we get nice numbers. So if I plug in 0, I'll get 0. Square root of 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. So we have 0, 1. And then 1, square root of 1 is 1, plus 1 is 2. And lastly, plug in 4. Square root of 4 is 2, plus 1 is 3. So I hope you notice something. If you look at f of x's chart versus f inverse of x chart, the x and y just switched. So that's another way that you can graph these, is just switching the points. So this was 1, 0, now it's 0, 1. 2, 1, now 1, 2. 3, 4, and now 4, 3. So that's the beautiful thing about f and f inverse. The domain becomes the range, and the range becomes the domain. All right, let's graph this one. I'll graph these in green. So I'll actually write over this x, y, just to kind of show that we're graphing these in green. So this is the inverse function. All right, so our first point is going to be 0, 1. So 0, 1's right there. And then next is 1, 2. So we go right 1, up 2. So that's right there. Our next point is 4, 3. So we go right 4, up 3, which is about right there. All right, so now we have enough points to graph. So it's going to look like this here. Going to go right through there and then forever to the right. Okay, notice this graph, the blue graph, f of x, and the green graph, f inverse of x, are symmetric about the line y equals x. All right, so I'll label that. This graph was f inverse of x. All right, so we have found, here's f of x here, we found our inverse function. We found the domain and range of each of the functions, and they match up nicely with the graphs here, which are symmetric about the line y equals x. Hey Kook, if you found this video helpful, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. For unlimited access to all of my Algebra 2 videos, visit mathkook.com. Thanks for watching.